Lawrence Merritt, known to most as Lore, wasn't a man built for compromise. At 42, he'd carved out a legacy with calloused hands and an unforgiving mind. The scars on his knuckles told stories of battles long past, from years before he became the owner of Ironclad Security, the most elite private security firm in Boston. The December wind cut through his tailored overcoat as he stepped out of the office snow, clinging to his 6'3" frame before melting from the heat he seemed to radiate. His team called it the Merritt Burn, that intensity he carried like a second skin. He was heading home early. Garrett Sullivan, his head of operations and a man who'd once served with the Lawn Rangers, raised an eyebrow. Lore checked his Rolex, a gift from his wife Natalie 5 years ago. 15 years. Hard to believe. Garrett's expression shifted barely. Lore caught it. He caught everything. Something wrong, Lore asked. No, Garrett replied. Just surprised. Didn't think you were the anniversary type. Garrett looked back to his computer screen a little too quickly. Lore lingered. After 15 years in special operations and another 10 running a security firm, his instincts were sharp. Something was off, but he pushed it aside. Natalie was waiting. Their marriage was the one thing he believed in absolutely. The one fortress he thought impenetrable. See you Monday, he said, heading out. The drive to their colonial-style home in Newton took 30 minutes. Lore used the time to shift gears from battle-hardened boss to husband. Natalie deserved that. She'd stayed by him after his final deployment, when he came back with nightmares and a temper he couldn't always contain. She'd supported him through the launch of Ironclad when he had nothing but grit and military contacts. Together, they'd built something real. As he turned onto their street, his phone buzzed. A text from his younger brother Russell. Need to talk. It's important. Lore frowned. Russell was 10 years younger, and the family's perennial disaster. Always in trouble. He silenced the phone. Whatever mess his brother was in could wait. Tonight was for Natalie. He pulled into the driveway of the house they'd renovated together. 3 bedrooms, no children. A choice they'd both made. His childhood with Vernon and Patricia Merritt had taught him families sometimes hurt more than they heal. The house was dark. He checked his watch, 7:30 p.m. Natalie's car wasn't in the driveway. Inside, a note in her handwriting waited on the kitchen counter. Working late. Don't wait up. Lore's jaw tightened. This wasn't like her. Not on their anniversary. He called Boston General, where she worked as a neurologist. Dr. Merritt left at 5, the night nurse said. Lore hung up without a word. His suspicion, already triggered by Garrett's strange behavior, hardened. He called Natalie's cell, straight to voicemail. Then he noticed her rarely worn Chanel perfume hung in the air. She'd been home recently. She'd changed. Lore moved through the house with the precision of a soldier, sweeping for threats. Nothing seemed out of place until he reached the bedroom. The closet door was slightly open. Her overnight bag was missing. In the bathroom, her essential toiletries were gone, too. This wasn't a late shift. She'd left. His phone rang again. Russell. This time, Lore answered. I've been trying to reach you, Russell said, voice tense. There's something you need to know about Natalie. 10 minutes later, Lore was tearing through the streets toward Russell's apartment in Cambridge. Russell's words had been cryptic, but gutting. I've seen Natalie with someone, more than once. I didn't want to believe it, but today, I overheard them. They're leaving tonight. Lore didn't ask for proof. Russell knew better than to speak without it. Russell met him at the door, pale and shaken. Show me, Lore demanded. Russell led him to a laptop. I took these last week. I saw them at Bonder Cafe. The photos showed Natalie sitting across from a man Lore didn't recognize, tall, blonde, dressed like a corporate executive. In one shot, the man's hand rested over Natalie's on the table. Who is he? Alexander Voss, pharmaceutical exec. I looked him up, Russell said, handing over a folder. They've been seen together for at least 6 months. Lore flipped through screenshots, records, public data. Alexander Voss, 38, divorced, no kids, chief marketing officer at Helix Pharmaceuticals. There's more, Russell said. They talked about a property sale. I followed them. They were discussing the lake house. Lore froze. The lake house? Your grandfather's place? The one he left to you? Lore stared at him. She can't sell it. It's in my name. You gave her power of attorney, Russell reminded him. 3 years ago after the knee surgeries. You never revoked it, Lore remembered. He hadn't thought it mattered. The sale goes through tomorrow, Russell said. They're meeting tonight to finalize paperwork. Gardner Street Storage, Unit 423. Rented under her name. Lore was already moving. Russell handed him a key card. I know someone who works there. Got you access. Lore took it without a word. What are you going to do, Russell asked. Nothing they don't deserve. As Lore turned to leave, his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Merritt, an officer's voice came through. This is Officer Reynolds with Boston PD. You need to come to your residence. There's been an incident. Lore's blood ran cold. What kind of incident? I can't say over the phone, sir. Please come right away. Lore ended the call and looked at Russell. The police are at my house. Russell's face went pale. You think... Natalie. I don't know, Lore said. But I'm going to find out. 20 minutes later, Lore pulled into his driveway. 2 police cruisers flanked the house. Lights pulsed in the quiet street. As he approached the front door, he saw her. Natalie stood in the doorway, tears streaking her face. Behind her stood Vernon and Patricia Merritt, his parents. They were supposed to be in Florida. His father stepped forward and gripped his arm tighter than expected from a man in his 70s. Son Vernon said. She didn't mean for it to go this far. Natalie's voice was a broken whisper. Don't let him see the garage. Lore pushed past all of them. One of the officers tried to stop him, but Lore didn't slow down. He flung open the garage door and froze. Russell lay on the concrete, blood pooled beneath his head. A uniformed officer knelt beside him, checking for vital signs. He found none. Next to Russell's body lay a crowbar. Lore recognized it instantly. It had a distinct, worn grip. His crowbar, from his toolbox, from this very garage. Mr. Merritt, the officer said cautiously, your wife called us. She said she came home and found your brother like this. Do you have any idea what happened? Lore's mind raced. Russell was supposed to be in Cambridge. Why would he come here separately? Then it hit him. He didn't. This was staged. He turned and looked at Natalie. Her tears now seemed calculated, not real. His parents stood behind her, their expressions strained, but not shocked. Something was off, deeply off. The officer stepped closer. Your wife says you've been under a lot of stress, angry, financial problems. She was worried. Lore stared at him. This wasn't about the affair. They had killed Russell, and now they were framing him for it. He kept his voice steady. Officer, my brother contacted me earlier tonight. He told me my wife was having an affair. I went to his apartment in Cambridge. We talked there, checked the traffic cameras, check his call log. The officer paused. Sir, your wife claims you've been unstable, paranoid, that you've made threats. She said she was afraid you might hurt yourself or others. Lore looked at Natalie. Her face was carefully blank. She knew what she was doing. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a coordinated takedown. As the officer pulled out handcuffs and began reading Lore his rights, something caught his eye. Partially hidden beneath Russell's body was a key. A storage unit key. The same kind Russell had given him minutes earlier. Gardner Street Storage, Unit 423. The evidence that could clear him was in that unit. I want to speak to my lawyer, Lore, said his voice eerily calm as the cuffs closed around his wrists. The interrogation room was cold, sterile. Lore had sat in plenty of rooms like this before, but never on this side of the table. Detective Malone entered a grizzled cop with tired eyes and a notebook full of assumptions. Mr. Merritt, he said, sitting down. You're in serious trouble. Lore said nothing. Beside him sat Benjamin Hargrove Ironclad's legal counsel and one of the few people Lore trusted. Malone opened a folder. We have a crowbar with your fingerprints, your brother's blood on it. We have your wife and your parents saying you've been threatening people. Lore looked him dead in the eye. Ask about Gardner Street Storage, Unit 423. The detective raised an eyebrow. My brother discovered my wife was having an affair with Alexander Voss. They were planning to sell property that belonged to me. The evidence is in that storage unit. Malone hesitated. Check Russell's phone. He called me twice tonight. Check the cameras outside his apartment. You'll see me there. I couldn't have been in 2 places at once. Ben leaned in. We're requesting you verify his alibi before proceeding. 3 hours later, Lore walked out of the police station free for now. Traffic footage placed him in Cambridge at the time of Russell's death. Russell's phone records backed up the story. It wasn't enough to arrest anyone else yet, but it was enough to clear Lore. "They'll come at you again," Ben warned as they left. "They've invested too much to let you walk away." Lore nodded. "I need everything you can find on Alexander Voss. What about your wife? Your parents?" Lore's eyes went cold. They made their choice. It was just after 2 a.m. when Lore arrived at Gardner Street storage. The place was empty. He used Russell's keycard to access Unit 423. Inside, he found boxes of documents, a laptop, and several flash drives. He took everything and brought it to his hotel room. He spent the rest of the night reviewing the files. What he found turned betrayal into something deeper, a full-scale conspiracy. Alexander Voss wasn't just Natalie's lover. He had used her to access confidential patient data from Boston General, especially patients in clinical trials with rival pharmaceutical companies. Natalie had pulled files outside her department. Voss used them for corporate espionage. The lake house sale, just a step in their escape plan. Framing Lore for Russell's murder was how they kept him out of the way. With Lore behind bars, they could disappear with the money from the property and whatever Helix Pharmaceuticals paid Voss for the stolen data. Even worse, there were messages between Natalie and Voss discussing how to handle Russell once he got too close. Financial records showed large sums of money transferred from Voss to Lore's parents. They weren't just bystanders. They were paid to back up Natalie's lies, paid to help frame their own son. By morning, Lore had enough to bring them all down. But he didn't take it to the police. He knew how the system worked. Plea deals, immunity scapegoats. Someone would cut a deal. Someone would walk away clean. That wasn't justice. They had taken his brother, tried to take his freedom, destroyed the only things in his life that truly mattered. A courtroom wouldn't deliver what they deserved. So he picked up his phone and called Garrett Sullivan. "I need the team," he said. "All of them. It's time to go to work." Garrett arrived at the hotel later that day with 5 men, all former special operators who now worked at Ironclad. These were men Lore had led through war zones. Men who had followed him into life-and-death situations without hesitation. He laid everything out: Russell's murder, the affair, the framing, the stolen research, the lake house, his parents' betrayal. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Diego Contreras, the surveillance expert, broke the silence. "So what's the plan, boss?" Lore walked to the whiteboard he'd dragged into the room and unfolded a map of Boston. "We're not going to kill them," he said. "That's too quick, too clean." His finger traced points across the city: Natalie's hospital, Voss's office, his parents' condo in Florida. "We're going to destroy them. Everything they are, everything they care about." He looked around the room. These men weren't just employees. They were warriors, and now they were soldiers in a new kind of war. "When we're done, they'll wish they were dead." 3 weeks passed. Lore moved like a ghost, watching his enemies return to normal. Natalie had moved back into their home after Lore's release, maintaining her innocence. Privately, she was still in contact with Voss. His parents had returned to Florida. Lore knew they were counting on the police to finish the job for them. They thought it was over. They were wrong. Lore had rented an apartment under an alias. He converted a spare bedroom into a war room. Photos, timelines, maps, phone records, bank transfers, surveillance logs, a web of red thread and pinned notes stretched across the walls. This was no longer about rage. This was a campaign, a surgical strike on every weak point they had. Surveillance complete. Diego reported laying out fresh photos. Voss keeps a tight schedule. Office, gym, hotel, same pattern. Lore nodded, and Natalie. "She's being careful, but she meets him twice a week at the Marriott." Garrett dropped a folder on the table. "Hospital board meeting minutes. She's up for department chair. Vote is in 2 weeks. Looks favorable." Lore opened the folder and smiled. Not for long. Calvin Reese, Ironclad's tech specialist, walked in with a laptop. "Finished going through Voss's accounts. He's leveraged hard. The payments to your parents were supposed to come out of a bonus he hasn't received yet. Helix is sniffing around someone flagged irregularities in the trial data." For the first time in weeks, Lore allowed himself a faint smile. Perfect. He looked around the table. Time to start phase 1. Calvin's job came first. He routed the original payments Voss made to Vernon and Patricia back into their accounts, then added an extra $50,000. It would look like Voss was panicking, trying to keep them quiet. Done. Calvin confirmed the next morning. Next, Diego delivered surveillance photos to Voss's private email, shots of Vernon at the casino, Patricia shopping, screenshots of the money transfers. The subject line: "Your liabilities are becoming visible." Lore didn't include a sender name. He didn't have to. Then came the hospital board. Garrett had arranged for an anonymous envelope to be delivered. Inside was a dossier evidence that Dr. Natalie Merritt had accessed confidential clinical trial files well outside her clearance, trial data belonging to Helix's competitors. That same day, the SEC received a whistleblower tip about Voss's stock activity timed perfectly with the leaks of competitor data. That evening, Lore sat in his car outside Boston General as Natalie walked out pale and shaken. Her phone rang. Voss, probably. He could see it in her face: panic, accusation, desperation. She drove straight to a quiet bar, and 30 minutes later, Voss arrived. Lore watched from a distance as they argued at the table, Voss gripping her arm, Natalie pulling away. Her expression changed, not just fear, but suspicion. She was beginning to realize the ground was shifting under her feet. Phase 1 was complete. 2 days later, Natalie received a second package, this one at home. Inside were photographs of Voss handing an envelope to Vernon, time-stamped the night Russell was killed. A note included, "Who do you think he'll turn on first?" Meanwhile, Voss discovered his corporate cards were maxed out with charges from escort services. His ex-wife received documentation of undisclosed assets he'd hidden during their divorce. The IRS received an anonymous tip about offshore accounts. Laura had made sure no detail could be traced. Each attack appeared to come from a different source. Each move increased their paranoia. Garrett watched the slow breakdown unfold from their surveillance feeds. "They're cracking," he observed. Lore nodded. "Good. Phase 2 starts tomorrow." The next morning, a package landed on Detective Malone's desk. Inside, copies of partial evidence from Unit 423. Enough to reopen the case, not enough to convict. When the police showed up at Voss's office with questions, he vomited into a trash can and left the building in a panic. That night, Natalie didn't return home. Lore's parents called her repeatedly. They left voicemails that grew more frantic by the hour. The alliance was fracturing. Lore watched it all from his shadowy vantage point. The architect of their unraveling. The storm that none of them saw coming. He was just getting started. A month into the campaign, Lore knew it was time to dig deeper. Watching them squirm from sabotage and suspicion wasn't enough. He needed to expose the foundation they'd built their betrayal on, and then bring it crashing down. "What do we know about Voss?" before Helix, Lore asked, standing in front of the board plastered with photos and records. Calvin pulled up a file on his laptop. Worked for 3 pharma companies in 5 years. Left each one under unusual circumstances. Unusual how? Nothing official. But I found sealed settlements. 2 sexual harassment cases. 1 accusation of falsifying data. The witness recanted. "Find them," Lore said. "All of them." Within days, they had names and locations. The whistleblower, Nathan Browning, had left the industry entirely. Now he taught high school chemistry in New Hampshire. Diego approached him quietly. The 2 harassment victims, both former assistants, had signed NDAs after large payouts. Lore tracked down the first, Melissa Davidson, now working in marketing in Providence. When Lore introduced himself, her reaction said everything. "I don't want to talk about Alexander Voss," she said, tight and guarded. "I'm not here to make trouble," Lore replied. "I'm here to stop him from hurting anyone else." He didn't mention Natalie or Russell. He introduced himself as an investigator working with victims. She hesitated. The fear in her eyes was real, but so was the bitterness. "That NDA doesn't protect criminal behavior," Lore said gently. "You wouldn't be alone this time." By the end of the conversation, she agreed to reach out to the other woman. Maybe. She wasn't sure. But she wasn't saying no. Diego had better luck. "Browning's been waiting for this moment," he said. "Says Voss tampered with trial data. Would have hurt patients. He only recanted because Voss threatened his family." Lore added the testimony to his growing arsenal. "Get it all to Malone. No names, just credible leads." While the police investigation reignited, Lore turned back to Natalie. She was already under review by the hospital board, but Lore needed to understand something he couldn't let go. What changed? How had the woman he trusted enough to marry, who supported him through surgeries, PTSD, and career changes, become someone capable of helping cover up his brother's murder? Calvin found the answer in Natalie's email archives. There were messages between her and Voss dating back over a year before their affair. They'd known each other since med school, reconnected at a conference 18 months earlier. Worse were the unsent drafts, journal entries she never shared. Lore read them without emotion the way he'd read intelligence files. She resented him. Not for anything specific, not for mistreatment, but for being too intense, too focused, too driven, for making her feel like she lived in his shadow. She wanted more. She wanted power, autonomy, recognition. Voss hadn't corrupted her. He'd offered her a chance to step out from behind Laurie's name. The emails weren't a confession, but they were close. Laurie studied them until every word was burned into memory. Then he closed the file and turned to Calvin. Find out where Voss got his money. The real source. Calvin dug into Voss's background again, this time deeper. What he found shifted everything. His lifestyle outpaces his salary by a lot, Calvin said. He's been funded. By who? Philip Donovan, Calvin said, dropping a name Lore didn't recognize. CEO of Meridian Pharmaceutical. Voss used to be engaged to his daughter. That ended, but Donovan kept him close. I found connections going back 15 years. Connections how, every time Voss moved companies, Donovan's company benefited. Stock moves, patent acquisitions, mergers, always with suspicious timing. Donovan never appeared directly, just behind the curtain. Lore looked at the evidence. Voss hadn't just been freelancing with stolen data. He'd been a proxy. Donovan's the one pulling the strings. Yeah, Calvin said, and he's very good at staying clean. Lore stared at the screen. Russell hadn't just been killed because he stumbled onto an affair. He'd uncovered a multi-million-dollar corporate espionage ring. Voss was the blade, but Donovan was the hand holding it. Get me everything on Donovan, Lore said. Family, finances, secrets. We're not stopping at Voss. That night, Lore sat alone, reviewing what they had. It was all there: Natalie's duplicity, Voss's manipulation, his parents' betrayal, Donovan's orchestration, the complete picture. And yet justice felt unfinished. Voss would be exposed. Natalie, too. But the man who benefited most, the one who fed the machine from the shadows, was still safe. Until now. It was time for Phase 3 controlled demolition. Lore didn't rush the final phase. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about precision. Donovan had to fall, but Lore wanted to finish what he started with Natalie Voss and his parents first. The trap had to close around all of them together. So he set the date noon 1 week later. The location, the lake house. He made the calls that night. First his father. Hello, Vernon's voice cracked with confusion. Hi, Dad. Silence. Lawrence Vernon finally said, cautious. We've been worried about you. No, you haven't, Lore replied. But you should be now. He let the weight of the moment settle. I know about Russell, about Natalie, about Voss. I have everything. Proof. Son, you're confused. I'm meeting Natalie at the lake house tomorrow. Noon. You and Mom should be there too. One chance to explain yourselves before I take it all to the police. He hung up. Next, he sent Natalie a single text I know about Voss. Meet me at the lake house at noon. One chance to explain before I go to the police. Finally, he contacted Voss's attorney claiming to have hard evidence that could help with bail negotiations and offering to present it at the lake house. The pieces were in motion. The next morning, Lore's team locked down the property. It was remote 20 acres of forest along the lake, far from neighbors or prying eyes. By 11 a.m., Lore was inside waiting. On the oak dining table sat a locked briefcase filled with everything: evidence, messages, transfers, photos. Natalie arrived first early alone. She stepped through the door and stopped cold when she saw him by the fireplace. Lore, she said cautiously, thank you for giving me the chance to explain. He didn't reply, just motioned toward a chair. She sat gripping her purse tightly. Her face tried to look remorseful, but her eyes scanned the room. I know how this looks, she began. But Alex and I, it wasn't some big plan. It just happened. And then, stop, Lore said, quiet but final. No more lies. I know everything. The data leaks, the payments, Russell. She froze. Russell was an accident, she said. Alex got angry. They fought. It wasn't supposed to. In our garage, with my crowbar, Lore said. Before she could stammer out another excuse, the door opened again. Vernon and Patricia entered. They faltered at the sight of Natalie already seated. Sit down, Lore said. His parents obeyed. Moments later, a luxury SUV pulled into the drive. Voss stepped through the door in a tailored suit and expensive sunglasses. He slowed when he saw everyone. What is this? He asked. Lore looked at him with no expression. This, he said, is Judgment Day. Lore walked to the table and opened the briefcase. He pulled out 5 folders. He handed one to each of them, keeping one for himself. Inside, he said, you'll find complete documentation of your crimes, securities fraud, espionage, conspiracy, obstruction, murder. They stared at the folders like they might burn. The police have copies, but they won't arrive for another hour. Voss stood abruptly. This is a trap. Garrett's voice came from the hallway. Doors locked. Natalie began crying. Patricia looked like she might faint. Vernon was pale but silent. Why are you doing this? Natalie asked through tears. Why not just turn us in? Lore's voice dropped. Because the legal system shows mercy. I won't. He pulled out a remote and turned on the TV mounted above the fireplace. Footage filled the screen, a grainy fixed-angle video. Russell confronting Voss and Natalie at the storage unit. The shouting, the argument escalating, the swing of a crowbar. The impact. Natalie screamed. Voss looked like he'd seen a ghost. You recorded it, Voss whispered. Russell did, Lore said. He suspected you'd try something. That camera was his backup plan. That was a lie. The footage was faked, stitched together by Calvin from storage security feeds and deep fake overlays. But it looked real. Real enough. Lore pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a confession. One of you signs it in the next 30 minutes or you all go down together. You're insane, Voss snapped. No, I'm giving you a choice, Lore said. One of you killed Russell. 4 of you helped cover it up. That person should face the most time. The rest, maybe you get a deal. But if no one talks, he let the threat hang. The psychological trap was perfect. He had spent weeks preparing it. Now he just watched. The collapse began fast. Voss blamed Natalie, said she pushed for the frame-up. Natalie shouted that Voss killed Russell, that she'd been afraid. Vernon claimed he and Patricia only helped clean up after the fact, never knowing the truth. Patricia started crying and pointing at Natalie. Then came new confessions. Natalie had given Voss the garage code. Patricia had suggested moving the body. Vernon had helped stage the scene. Lore recorded all of it. 30 minutes passed. Police sirens echoed through the trees. Panic set in. Voss grabbed the paper and signed it, writing that everyone else had helped. Natalie lunged to add her own name and plea for leniency. Vernon tried to run only to be blocked by Diego. As the police surrounded the house, Lore stood at the head of the table, still and calm. They didn't hate him. They hated each other. That was the victory. Justice would be delivered by the courts. But vengeance, that had already been done. 6 months later, Boston couldn't stop talking about the trial. Alexander Voss was convicted of first-degree murder. The evidence, real and faked, sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Life without parole. Natalie Merritt took a plea deal, 20 years for obstruction conspiracy, and her role in the cover-up. She wept during sentencing, but the judge was unmoved. Vernon and Patricia Merritt each got 15 years as accessories. Their lawyers tried to argue diminished capacity and manipulation. It didn't work. The judge called their actions cold-blooded, calculated, and shameful. Lore testified clinically, no emotion, just facts. He watched them all crumble from the witness stand, each one throwing the others under the bus to save themselves. No one succeeded. The justice system had done its part. But closure, that was harder. The lake house sat quiet as winter faded. Lore stood on the dock staring out at the gray water. The property had been nearly lost, sold off as part of a lie. Now it was legally his again, but it didn't feel like it had once. The memories were too loud. His brother's laughter, late-night fishing trips, escaping their parents' chaos just long enough to believe peace was real. Garrett stepped onto the dock beside him holding 2 coffees. He handed one over. It's over, Garrett said. Lore didn't look at him. Is it? You won. They're all where they belong. Lore gave a small nod. Then why doesn't it feel like victory? Garrett didn't answer right away. Because you lost too much getting here. That hit harder than Lore expected. Because it was true. He'd burned down the lives of the people who betrayed him, but they'd taken things that couldn't be rebuilt. Russell. His marriage. His belief that family meant anything more than obligation. Back in Boston, Lore buried himself in work. Ironclad, expanded fast, new contracts, new hires, more overseas operations. It should have felt like momentum. Instead, it felt like survival. He started sleeping in his office, working 20-hour days. His staff noticed. Garrett confronted him again. This isn't purpose, Lore. This is obsession. I'm focused. You're avoiding everything that isn't tactical. No reply. Then something shifted. One night, Lore dreamed about Russell for the first time in months. They were back at the lake fishing. Nothing special. Just a moment. But in the dream, Russell looked at him and said, "You got them, big brother. But at what cost?" Lore woke before dawn. That question stuck in his head like shrapnel. At the office, Calvin was already working as usual. "I need information," Lore said. "On who?" "Voss. Before all of this. Before Boston. His connections, his money. I think we missed something. I thought we were done with him." Lore shook his head. Someone was protecting him. Calvin got to work. 3 days later, Calvin came back with a file. "Found him. Philip Donovan." Lore opened the file. The man staring back at him was in his mid-60s, silver hair, sharp suit, dead eyes. CEO of Meridian Pharmaceutical. Built the company from the ground up, ruthless, smart and clean, too clean. Donovan funded Voss for over a decade. His companies benefited every time Voss leaked data. I cross-checked. Patterns are obvious once you know what to look for. Lore kept reading. Donovan was engaged to his daughter. The engagement ended, but Donovan kept him in his orbit. He kept flipping. Sealed settlements, shell companies, insider trading rumors, whispered scandals that never stuck. He paused on one detail. Donovan visited Voss in jail, Calvin said. 3 times. Always registered as legal counsel so there'd be no recordings. Lore closed the file slowly. So Voss wasn't acting alone. No, Calvin said. He was someone's weapon. Donovan hadn't just benefited from the crime. He'd helped create the conditions for it. Voss had been his attack dog. And when the dog bit too hard, he'd abandoned him. "Get me everything on Donovan," Lore said. "Every deal, every account, every pressure point." Calvin nodded. "You want to bring him down?" Lore's jaw clenched. "No, I want to make sure justice finishes what revenge started. Philip Donovan wasn't just rich, he was insulated. Clean on paper, ruthless in practice. His company Meridian Pharmaceutical had swallowed competitors, buried whistleblowers, and walked the line of legality so many times the line was blurry. But everyone had a weakness. Lore planned to find his. "This has to be different," he told his team. "No shadows, no blackmail. This time we go public. We destroy his name, his empire, legally and permanently." Garrett leaned back. "We need a crack, something internal." Lore nodded. "We need a lever. And I think I know who it is." Michael Donovan, Philip's son, had followed his father into the business world, but reluctantly. He worked in Meridian's legal department. No power, no spotlight. A company man because it was expected, not because he believed in it. Calvin dug through Michael's public and private life. The picture that emerged was of a quiet, capable man suffocated by legacy. He had no criminal history, no scandals, but he had distance from his father and from Meridian's more aggressive strategies. "He's not clean," Calvin said, "but he's not like the others. I think he regrets where he is." Lore set up the meeting under a false name, attending a charity gala Michael would be at. A shared connection made the introduction. They talked casually at first about biotech regulations, ethics, and pharmaceuticals. Then Lore pushed. The line between aggressive R&D and exploitation gets thinner every year. Michael didn't flinch, but his response was measured. Some companies cross it, even if they don't admit it. Lore leaned in slightly. Meridian's Alzheimer's trials come to mind. Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't walk away. "What do you know about those trials?" he asked. "Enough to be concerned," Lore said, "particularly about where the research came from. They exchanged cards, nothing more, but the seed was planted." Over the next 3 weeks, Lore carefully cultivated the connection. They met 3 more times, each conversation closer to the truth. Lore never revealed his real identity. He let Michael connect the dots himself. Eventually, Michael opened up. "My father is dying," he said quietly during their fourth meeting. "Early onset Alzheimer's. He's been hiding it. The experimental treatments were buying time, but now he's slipping." Lore didn't react. Michael went on. "He's desperate, pushing boundaries. I'm not sure what lines he's willing to cross anymore." "He already crossed them," Lore replied, "and I can prove it. But I need help." Michael didn't answer right away. "You think I'll betray my father?" "I think you already want to." 6 days later, Michael delivered a flash drive. Internal memos, trial data, financial transactions, private emails, a roadmap of Meridian's crimes. It showed exactly how Philip Donovan had used Voss and Natalie as inside assets to steal competitor data and manipulate trial results. It even included a buried memo authorizing increased payment to Dr. NM after the Boston General breach. "What are you going to do with this?" Michael asked. "What should have been done the moment my brother died," Lore said. "Tell the truth." Michael studied him. "This isn't just business for you." "No," Lore said. "This is justice, reinforced." Lore moved quickly. He sent the documents to the FBI, the SEC, and the FDA simultaneously. He stripped out any evidence that would point back to Michael or himself. Then he shared pieces of the file with patient advocacy groups, medical ethics boards, and a dozen journalists. He reached out to Catherine Donovan Phillips' estranged daughter living in Switzerland. He didn't speak to her directly, but someone close to her received the documents. A week later, she sent a statement to federal prosecutors confirming that Voss had been operating under her father's influence during their engagement, that her father had quietly used company assets to support off-the-books activity. The web closed fast. Within a month, Meridian stock collapsed. Investors fled. Clinical trials were suspended. Congressional committees launched inquiries. Philip Donovan was forced to resign. Then came the FBI raids. Lore watched from a car across the street as agents stormed Donovan's estate. The old man shuffled out in handcuffs, pale and confused. The reports later confirmed it. The stress had accelerated his symptoms. The treatments had stopped. The mind was fading. Garrett said later, "He's not the man who gave the orders anymore." Lore didn't reply. He wasn't here for satisfaction. He was here to make sure the dominoes kept falling. That night, Detective Malone called. "Voss is talking," he said bluntly. "Says Donovan was the one who pushed him. Says your brother figured it out. That's why Voss had to deal with him." "Will that help Voss?" "No, but it might extend Natalie's sentence, and it confirms what we suspected." After he hung up, Lore sat in silence. The architect behind Russell's death had been exposed. The structure had been torn down, but the cost still immeasurable. The next morning, Michael Donovan asked to meet. They sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant before opening hours. The flash drive had changed everything for both of them. "My father tried to take his own life last night," Michael said. "His eyes were hollow. He left a full confession. It's bad." Lore didn't flinch. "I'm sorry it came to that." Michael nodded. "He mentioned someone named Russell in the letter. Said Voss handled the problem after your brother got too close." There it was. Confirmation direct from the man who'd started it all. Lore looked up, met Michael's eyes. "Russell was my brother." Michael exhaled like he'd been punched. "You orchestrated all of this. I exposed what your father tried to bury," Lore said. "Voss, Natalie, my parents, they all took part. But your father built the system." Michael didn't argue. He knew it already. Knew the damage couldn't be undone. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Lore said, "justice runs its course. Your father faces what's left of it. Meridian either dissolves or reforms, and people hurt by the stolen research finally get answers." "And you," Michael asked, "what do you get?" Lore didn't answer right away. "Then maybe closure. Maybe just the space to figure out what comes next." 1 year after Russell's death, Lore stood at his brother's grave. A breeze rolled across the cemetery. Morning light warmed the granite headstone. "It's done," Lore said. "All of them are paying for what they did." Philip Donovan had died awaiting trial. The Alzheimer's accelerated under stress. The experimental treatment stopped. The control slipped away. Meridian had been dismantled, its assets sold, its research discredited, every corner of its legacy exposed. Natalie had her sentence extended. New charges tied to her collaboration with Donovan meant she'd be in prison until her 60s. Vernon and Patricia Merritt remained behind bars. Their appeals denied. Their health had begun to fade. They wrote letters asking for forgiveness. Lore never opened them. Justice had been served. Clean, ruthless, unforgiving. But still it didn't feel whole. "You'd tell me to move on," Lore said, laying a hand on the stone. "You always were better at that." The wind rustled nearby trees, peaceful but not comforting. He turned to leave. That's when he saw her. A woman mid-30s stood at a respectful distance. Professional, composed. "Mr. Merritt," she asked as he approached. "I'm Dr. Harper Browning. I worked with your brother at Mass General." Lore searched his memory. Russell had mentioned her. Once. "You were in research." She nodded. "We were working on a treatment protocol for PTSD. He said it mattered to him because of you." Lore's heart stopped briefly. "What kind of treatment?" "Long-term neuro-response stabilization," she said. Russell believed it could help veterans. He said if it helped even one soldier suffer less than you did, it would be worth everything. Lore didn't speak. She handed him a card. "We've kept working on it. We're ready for clinical trials, but after the Donovan scandal, no one wants to touch psychiatric research." "Why tell me?" "Because Russell believed in this project, and he believed in you. He said you never gave up on what mattered. He told me if we ever hit a wall, you were the person who could break through it." Lore took the card and stared at her. "I'll have my team review the research." "Thank you," she said. "Russell would be grateful." She walked away. Lore stood motionless for a long time, the business card clutched in his hand. He felt something stir. Something he hadn't felt since Russell died. Not vengeance, not anger. Purpose. 2 weeks later, Lore sat with Garrett, Calvin, and Diego in the ironclad conference room. He laid out a new mission. "I want to establish a foundation in Russell's name," he said. "Focused on PTSD treatment and research. We'll fund the work ourselves. No pharmaceutical partners." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "This is the project his colleague brought you," Lore nodded. "And it's good. More importantly, it's what he cared about." Calvin leaned forward. "We have the money. But this would be a shift." "Not a shift," Lore said. "An expansion. Ironclad keeps running, but this is our legacy." By the end of the meeting, the Russell Merritt Foundation for Combat Trauma Research had a name, a mission, and the full weight of Ironclad behind it. Lore poured himself into the project. He met with researchers, reviewed trial data, interviewed veterans for input. Dr. Harper Browning agreed to lead the team. Her focus matched his. The work was real, difficult, important, and it changed him. Slowly. One night, Harper and Lore were reviewing early results in his office. The data looked promising. She hesitated before speaking. "Do you ever regret how things ended with them?" she asked. "Natalie, your parents." Lore thought for a long moment. "I regret that Russell paid the price. I regret they forced the ending. But not what you did." "No." She didn't push him, just nodded. "He used to say you were the most principled person he knew," she said. "That when everything else crumbled, you'd still be standing." Lore didn't respond. But something about the words settled deep in his chest. He had stood. Through betrayal, loss, war, and vengeance, he had endured. And now maybe he could begin to build something that mattered. 2 years to the day after Russell's murder, Lore returned to the lake house. The renovation was complete. He'd stripped away the memories that had been poisoned, new walls, new flooring, different furniture, but the soul of the place remained untouched. It still faced the lake, still held the silence he'd always sought here. Garrett joined him on the dock. The two men stood side by side, watching the sun slide low across the water. "The Foundation's first treatment protocol just got FDA approval," Garrett said. "Russell would be proud." Lore nodded, eyes locked on the horizon. "It's a start." "You're never going to move on, are you?" Garrett asked. The tone wasn't judgment, it was understanding. "No," Lore said. "But I'm moving forward." The distinction mattered. Moving on meant closure, forgetting, forgiveness. He wasn't interested in any of that. He would never forgive Natalie, never forget what his parents had done, never soften toward Voss or the man behind him. Some debts had to be paid in full. Some betrayals didn't deserve absolution. But moving forward, that he could do. The Russell Merritt Foundation had grown fast. Backed by Ironclad's financial strength and Lore's relentless drive, it drew top-tier researchers and global attention. They launched clinical trials for new PTSD treatments, built partnerships with veteran organizations, created jobs for former soldiers transitioning to civilian life. Lore met every week with Harper and her team. Not from a distance, but in it, fully invested. And slowly the edge in him dulled, not gone, but redirected. The people closest to him noticed. Diego once said, "You've got the same look in your eye, boss, but now it's about saving lives, not ending them." Lore didn't reply, but he knew Diego was right. One night, Harper stayed late in Lore's office. They had reviewed trial data funding reports and long-term strategy for hours. As she packed her things, she paused. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Lore looked out the window for a long time. "No," he said. "Not coldly, not bitterly. Just honest. I don't believe in forgiving what was deliberate, what was cruel." She didn't press, just nodded. He said something else once, she said. "Russell," he said, "when everything else was taken from you, your past, your family, your principles would still stand. That was your foundation." Lore turned to her. His voice was low. "Then I'll keep building on that." Years passed. The foundation expanded internationally. More veterans were helped. More lives changed. The lake house became a retreat for recovering soldiers, part rehab center, part sanctuary. Lore kept an office there, but rarely used it. He preferred to spend time talking with the people they served. Listening. He no longer lived in the shadows of what had been done to him. He didn't try to bury it. He built around it. He remained who he had always been, uncompromising, principled, relentless. But now that strength didn't destroy. It protected. On the 10th anniversary of Russell's death, Lore stood alone on the dock. The water reflected the morning sky. He felt the wind shift like it had the day Russell first took him fishing. "You were right," he said aloud. "About me. About what mattered." He didn't expect a sign, or a voice in his head. He didn't need one. Because what stood behind him now, the foundation, the work, the lives changed, that was the response. His legacy wasn't just vengeance. It was justice with teeth and purpose that endured. Some debts must be paid in full. Some betrayals cannot be absolved. But from ruin, something stronger can rise if the foundation is solid. And Lore Merritt's foundation still stood, not softened by time, not weakened by grief, but forged in fire, unshaken, unbreakable. Here's the next story. Silas Mercer had built his life the way he built everything else, methodically, with discipline and focus. At 42, he was the image of controlled success, founder of an elite security firm that catered to high-net-worth clients and international corporations. He had risen from nothing to become a central figure in the world of private protection and intelligence. His name meant something in the corridors of wealth and power. From the outside, everything looked ideal. He was married to Veronica Radcliffe, the daughter of banking titan Theodore Radcliffe. Their estate sprawled across 10 acres of manicured Connecticut countryside, and their children, Parker and Faye, excelled in their private schools. Silas was the chief security advisor to Radcliffe Financial, one of the most powerful institutions in the Northeast. He attended board meetings, oversaw complex digital defenses, and quietly eliminated threats before they could touch the family brand. It was the American dream. Or at least it looked like it. But Silas knew better than most that appearances meant nothing. Before becoming Silas Mercer, he had been something else, something buried so deep that even Veronica didn't know the full truth. He had served in black ops, operating in places that didn't exist on maps. His assignments were the kind of work nations denied ever authorizing. He had dismantled crime syndicates, brokered classified operations, and seen what the world looked like when the lights were turned off. And when he walked away from it all 15 years ago, he didn't just leave a job, he buried a version of himself. He thought he'd buried it for good. But the dead don't stay buried forever. On a brisk April morning, Silas stood by the window in his home office, sipping black coffee and watching his wife pace the stone pathway along their garden. She was on the phone, her tone sharp-clipped businesslike. Her posture was tense in a way he hadn't seen before, urgent, defensive. She didn't know he was watching. And if she did, she didn't care. He didn't need audio to hear what wasn't being said. For the past few months, he had been collecting the puzzle pieces quietly, carefully. It had started with a misrouted email. An internal document meant for someone else had landed in a system Silas monitored as part of his role. The contents were coded, but he recognized the format, an old kind of encryption he'd used years ago, a fail-safe system designed for plausible deniability. That email had opened a door, and behind that door he found a different version of his life, one he'd never agreed to. Now he had all the answers. That evening, Veronica stepped into the kitchen in a designer dress he didn't recognize. Her blonde hair was styled with an effortless kind of perfection. She moved like someone who expected the world to move with her. "You've been quiet this week," she said casually. "Is everything all right with the Phillips assessment?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Phillips isn't the issue," he said, setting down his drink. "I'm more concerned about inconsistencies in our personal accounts." A pause. Just a beat too long. Her smile held, but something shifted around her eyes. What kind of inconsistencies? Large transfers? Unusual patterns? It's probably nothing, he said smoothly. She tilted her head, then pivoted like a seasoned performer. "Theo needs that security report tomorrow. The Monroe merger is making him nervous. I'm aware." "The report will be ready," Silas said. He said it because he knew it would be, and because it would do exactly what it was designed to do, blow up everything. The conversation ended as Parker and Faye burst into the room, laughing and half-arguing over something they were watching on their phones. Parker was 17, tall, athletic, self-assured. Faye, 2 years younger, sharp as glass, and just as cutting when she wanted to be. They were a picture-perfect family, except the picture was fake. "Mom, can I take the BMW tonight?" Parker asked, avoiding eye contact with Silas. "Ask your stepfather," she replied, still distracted by her phone. Parker turned with mild reluctance. I'll be careful." "The keys are in my office," Silas said. "On one condition, pick up your sister from dance at 9. "But that's right in the middle of—" "Those are the terms." Parker grumbled but accepted. Faye gave a quick thanks and disappeared up the stairs. Silas stood there watching them go. He had once believed these moments mattered. He'd tried to build something lasting. He remembered holding Faye for the first time in the hospital room, thinking his life was finally stable, finally normal. But DNA didn't lie. Neither child was biologically his. And now that he knew so much else made sense, the awkward silences, the evasive glances, the subtle ways they treated him more like a chaperone than a father. After the kids left, Veronica's phone buzzed. She looked down and stood abruptly. "I'm meeting Lydia for drinks. She's having another meltdown about Boyd. Don't wait up." She kissed his cheek, a gesture rehearsed over years. It meant nothing now. The moment she left, Silas moved to his study. He opened the secure drive concealed in the bookshelf and pulled out the encrypted laptop he hadn't touched in 15 years. The data was already there. Surveillance logs, GPS tracking, financial reports. Records of weekly visits to a downtown penthouse registered to Dominic Walsh Radcliffe Financial's general counsel. Phone logs showing thousands of texts exchanged between Veronica and Dominic some just minutes apart. And then the files that settled everything, 2 paternity reports independently sourced and irrefutable. Neither Parker nor Faye carried a single trace of his DNA. Veronica had lied to him for 17 years. Built a marriage out of convenience, probably orchestrated by Theodore. The man had seen Silas as a resource, not a son-in-law. And now the final insult, the security report due tomorrow, wasn't about merger risks or external threats. It was the trigger for a trap designed to ruin him. Theodore and Dominic had been using Silas's security firm to launder money through shell companies and offshore accounts. When the pressure mounted, they planned to frame Silas as the architect of the scheme. He was to be the fall guy. They'd thought he wouldn't see it coming. They forgot who he was. Silas logged into an account only a handful of people in the world knew existed. The interface was simple. Obsolete to most, but still perfectly functional for those who knew how to use it. He typed 6 words. "Phoenix requires activation. Timeline immediate." Within minutes, a reply appeared. "Phoenix protocol initiated. Assets standing by." Silas leaned back, eyes on the screen, the weight of 17 years settling over him. They wanted a fall guy. They were about to get something much worse. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Silas was in the home gym by 5 a.m., working through a brutal routine that left no room for thought. Deadlifts, pull-ups, push presses, his movements were precise and deliberate. He wasn't just maintaining muscle. He was sharpening something that had dulled over the years his edge. Between sets, he reviewed files on his encrypted tablet. The evidence had mounted beyond anything he originally expected. GPS data from Veronica's car showed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she claimed she was attending charity board meetings. But her destination was the same every time, a penthouse belonging to Dominic Walsh. On Saturdays, when she said she had back-to-back spa appointments, she and Dominic retreated to a lakefront cabin owned by a shell corporation that traced directly back to Theodore Radcliffe. They weren't just hiding an affair. They were building a life together, one that excluded him entirely. More disturbing was what he'd uncovered in the financial records. For nearly 7 years, money had been quietly siphoned from his security firm funds, disguised as consulting fees, maintenance costs, subcontractor payments, all rerouted to unlisted accounts. The trail led straight to Theodore and Dominic. They had used his company as a laundering vehicle, moving capital for foreign entities under the radar. What started as white-collar crime crossed quickly into international law violations. If discovered, it would take down Radcliffe Financial and everyone tied to it. That's why they needed a scapegoat. And Silas, with his military past and secretive nature, was the perfect candidate. The gym door opened. Faye stepped in, already dressed in her school uniform, hair neatly tied back. "Morning, Dad," she said. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were searching. "You're up early," Silas replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "AP Chem test, I wanted to review." She hesitated at the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you and Mom okay? You both seem different lately." Silas paused. The question shouldn't have affected him. But something about her expression, the uncertainty, the hint of fear tugged at a part of him he wasn't ready to sever. Despite the lies, despite the DNA results, he had raised her. That mattered, didn't it? "Why do you ask?" he said carefully. "I heard Grandpa Theo talking to Mom yesterday. It sounded serious. They stopped when I walked in." Silas kept his face neutral. "Sometimes adults have complex things to work through. It's not your burden." She nodded, satisfied, or at least willing to pretend she was. After she left, Silas checked the time. The Radcliffe board meeting started at 10 a.m. That's where he would present his final security report, the one he'd rewritten entirely. This was the spark, the moment that would turn fire into detonation. He showered and dressed in a dark, tailored suit buttoned with precision. The cut was conservative, masking his strength beneath clean lines and crisp fabric. From the outside, he looked like any other high-level executive heading to a routine meeting. But he wasn't heading to a boardroom. He was heading to war. At breakfast, Veronica was unexpectedly warm. She poured his coffee without asking and suggested dinner plans for the weekend. Her charm was turned up, and it wasn't for him, it was performance. Silas recognized it immediately. "Will you be home for dinner?" she asked. "There's a new place in Hartford. I thought we could try it." He looked at her over his coffee. "Let's see how the day unfolds." Something flickered in her expression. "Your father seems anxious about your report." "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should," he replied. Her smile twitched. She didn't understand the meaning beneath his words. Not yet. On the way to Radcliffe Financial headquarters, Silas made 2 calls. The first was to Mara Cavell, a cyber operations specialist who worked under an assumed identity. To most, she was a harmless IT consultant. In truth, she had helped destabilize regimes through code alone. "Is our digital entry complete?" he asked as he drove. "Firewall bypassed, backups compromised, fail-safes in place. Your report will be the only source of truth," Mara replied. The second call was to a man known only as Bishop, former Delta Force, now a specialist in physical security logistics and extraction. "Personnel in place?" Silas asked. "All 4 assets embedded, security feeds rerouted. If the board calls the police, we'll know before they do." "Good." He parked in the executive lot, greeted by a small nod from the building's private guards. Men he had personally trained. Men who had no idea their paychecks were already being rerouted to different bank accounts. He entered his office to find Dominic Walsh waiting. "Morning," Silas Dominic said, leaning against the desk with a casual smirk. "Theo asked me to review your report before the meeting. Just routine." Silas said nothing at first. He walked past him, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a sealed folder. "This is the preliminary draft," he said. "The full version includes additional material. That will be presented to the board." Dominic opened the folder and flipped through it. As he read, his jaw tightened. "This isn't what we discussed," he said quietly. "You were supposed to emphasize external threats. Not this." "I followed the evidence," Silas said flatly. "As I've always done." "You're making a mistake. You could destabilize relationships we've spent years building." "I think that's already happened." Dominic slammed the folder shut and tossed it back on the desk. "This won't end the way you think." Silas met his gaze. "I'm counting on that." Dominic walked out, tension radiating off him. Silas checked his phone. A message from Mara awaited him. "All systems prepped. Extraction ready." At 9:58 a.m., Silas made his way to the top-floor boardroom where Radcliffe Financial's most powerful players gathered around a polished mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling windows cast bright daylight across their polished shoes and silk ties. Theodore Radcliffe sat at the head, impeccable. Silver hair trimmed to perfection, he looked like power. Dominic sat beside him. To Silas's quiet surprise, Veronica had arrived too. She sat toward the back of the room, an unusual presence for a security report. "Silas has prepared a strategic update on current risk factors," Theodore said. "Let's proceed." Silas stood adjusting his jacket. "Today's report is different," he said calmly. "It outlines not only external vulnerabilities but internal breaches, long-term compromises that now threaten the very foundation of this company." The room went still. He handed out sealed folders. "Please do not open until I direct you." Dominic leaned forward. "We should skip to the merger risks." "We'll get there," Silas replied. He clicked a button, and the screen behind him lit up with a flowchart of financial transactions. For the past 7 years, Radcliffe Financial has been exposed to internal financial activity designed to avoid regulatory detection. Funds have been laundered through a network of shell companies, many of which pass through my firm's infrastructure. Gasps rippled around the table. Theodore narrowed his eyes. "You're accusing my institution of criminal activity." "I'm not accusing," Silas said. "I'm presenting evidence. Open the folders." Inside were detailed reports, account histories, and audio transcripts of private conversations, some involving Theodore, others featuring Dominic. Every document had been verified and cross-checked with off-site backups. Dominic stood face flushed. "This is outrageous. It's a smear campaign." Silas clicked again. A voice played over the speakers, Theodore's voice. "He's so locked into procedure he doesn't see what's right in front of him. That's what makes him useful." The room fell into stunned silence. Then Silas dropped the final slide paternity test results. "These results confirm that Parker and Faye are not biologically mine. This information was known to key individuals here and withheld." Veronica stood trembling. "This isn't the time or place." "It's exactly the time," Silas said calmly. "Get out," Theodore snapped. "You're finished." "I have 29 minutes to vacate the building," Silas replied, "but before I go." He paused. "Check your phones." Every phone lit up with a flood of missed calls and messages. Financial systems were being frozen. Raids underway. Data leaked. "What have you done?" Theodore whispered. Silas looked him dead in the eyes. "The question isn't what I've done, Mr. Radcliffe. The question is, what have you done?" He turned and walked out, calm, measured. The war had officially begun. The Radcliffe boardroom descended into chaos the moment Silas closed the door. Voices raised, phones ringing, chairs scraped back from the table as directors checked devices and barked into their headsets. At the center of it all, Theodore Radcliffe stood, motionless eyes fixed on the now blank presentation screen, like a man trying to process the unthinkable. In the hallway, Silas walked calmly toward the elevator, briefcase in hand. His heart rate hadn't climbed once. Every move had been calculated months in advance. He wasn't reacting, he was executing. Mara was waiting near the exit in a tailored navy blazer, holding a tablet against her chest. "All systems are live," she said quietly as they matched pace. Federal warrants have been issued. Enforcement teams are inbound to every flagged location. Offshore account traces are triggering asset seizures, Good Silas replied, and the media drop. Time for 1 hour after the raids begin. They reached the garage. Bishop was already behind the wheel of a nondescript black SUV. Security feeds looped, he said. The building's internal response teams are looking the other way. As the vehicle pulled away from Radcliffe Financial Headquarters, the alarms began to sound. Phase 1 was complete. 6 hours later, Silas sat in a hotel room in downtown Albany. The curtains were drawn. Multiple screens covered the coffee table, all streaming live news coverage from different outlets. Radcliffe Financial was collapsing in real time. Federal agents executed warrants at 17 locations today in connection with an ongoing investigation into financial misconduct at one of the nation's most powerful private banking institutions. On another channel, footage showed agents escorting Dominic Walsh out of his townhouse in cuffs, his usually polished face pale and stunned. Theodore had not been arrested yet, but he'd been removed from his office pending further inquiry. That was only a formality now. Investigators say this may be the largest coordinated financial investigation since the Lehman collapse, a talking head intoned. Sources suggest the whistleblower may be someone with high-level access to Radcliffe systems. Silas muted the sound. The narrative was writing itself, and that was fine. Let the world believe it had been a corporate whistleblower or an anonymous Good Samaritan. No one needed to know the truth. Mara sat at the desk reviewing intel. She looked up. The team retrieved all priority assets, safe house systems secured, emergency backups duplicated and relocated. Silas nodded. And the children. Parker fled his campus when the first reports hit. He's at Blake's place, likely assuming the storm will pass. Faye is staying with her Aunt Miranda for now. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. That part still hit differently. He remembered teaching Parker to ride a bike, walking Faye through algebra homework, driving through upstate Connecticut on snowy weekends with both kids asleep in the back seat. They weren't his, not by blood, but he had loved them like they were. He'd given them everything he had, and they'd helped spy on him. Begin phase 2 at midnight, he said quietly. No deviations. Mara tapped the command into her tablet. Understood. You should sleep, she added. Silas gave a faint smile. I've operated on less. At exactly midnight, a dozen new digital packages were deployed across government servers, journalistic inboxes, financial regulatory bodies, and international watchdog groups. Each included evidence meticulously gathered and organized, falsified contracts, back-channel transfers, confidential meeting recordings, and client rosters that implicated foreign entities. But the most damning files weren't about money. They were about betrayal. Veronica's email threads with Dominic. Her voice recordings complaining about the performance she had to maintain at home. The messages between Parker and Dominic quietly updating his real father on Silas's daily movements. By dawn, none of them would be able to deny the truth. Silas didn't sleep. Instead, he stood at the window watching the early morning fog roll across Albany's skyline. You became human, Mara had said earlier. No. He had pretended to be human. He had worn the mask of a husband, a father, a son-in-law, but it had all been role play. What lived under the surface was something older, something honed by war and betrayal. He had let it sleep for 17 years, and now it was awake again. His phone buzzed. Status update: Radcliffe assets 74% frozen. Offshore transfers interrupted. Market fallout significant. A second message followed seconds later. Dominic Walsh bail denied. Silas exhaled. Everything was moving on schedule. He picked up his burner phone and dialed a secure line. Go ahead, came Bishop's voice. Greenwich Estate, Silas said. She'll go there next. Already watching, Bishop replied. 3 signatures on site. Veronica, housekeeper, and one unknown, possibly Lydia. Lydia Chambers, Silas asked. Yep, best friend and longest-running alibi. That tracked. Veronica would turn to her next. The damage control instincts had kicked in. What's the girl's status? Faye's safe. Miranda's unaware she's being monitored. She'll stay that way. Good. Keep eyes on Parker. I want him watched, not touched yet. Understood. Silas hung up and glanced back at the screens. More headlines. More chaos. Radcliffe Financial had lost nearly 18% of its value overnight. Early projections said over $3 billion had vanished from investor portfolios. The federal government was assembling a joint task force. All of that was background noise. He didn't care about money. Not really. He cared about consequences. By 8:00 a.m., Veronica Radcliffe Mercer arrived at her mother's Greenwich estate. Silas watched her through live drone footage streamed to his tablet. She looked shaken, hair undone, makeup smudged, wearing a trench coat 2 sizes too large. She didn't look like the woman who had charmed senators and billionaires at galas. She looked like someone whose world was cracking open. She entered the foyer, spoke with the housekeeper, then joined Lydia Chambers in the kitchen. Silas tapped the screen, activating the remote audio feed. "He blindsided us," Veronica was saying. "He just stood there in front of the board, reading out every one of our moves like he'd been preparing it for years." "He has," Lydia said. "You just weren't paying attention." "Don't do that," Veronica snapped. "Don't act like I missed something obvious. No one could have expected this. He was soft." "He used to be," Lydia said evenly. Veronica paced. "What are we going to do? My father's being held. Dominic is a mess. Parker's hiding. Faye's unreachable. I don't even have access to my own accounts." Lydia poured 2 cups of coffee. "You think he'll come for you directly?" Veronica didn't answer right away. "Then he doesn't need to. Everything I built is gone. The house, the family, the future, he burned it all." Silas watched her face as she said it. It wasn't remorse, it was loss, for herself. She still didn't understand what she'd done, which meant she still didn't understand what was coming. By 10:00 a.m., Silas was in a transport van en route to the Greenwich perimeter. Bishop drove. Mara monitored comms from the back. "You're going in personally?" she asked. Silas nodded. "She needs to hear it from me." "Not a good idea to get that close. I won't touch her. I won't need to." They pulled into a private road and parked near a wooded trail behind the estate. Bishop handed Silas an earpiece synced to the interior audio feeds. "Team Alpha's already inside perimeter," Bishop said. "Housekeeper's on the move. Lydia's still in the kitchen. And Veronica, 2nd floor. Bedroom windows open. She's not sleeping." Silas stepped out of the van, pulled on gloves, and adjusted his jacket. "Stand by," he said. "If she runs, let her. If she fights." "We finish it," Bishop said. "No, we document it." Silas walked through the trees, the house coming into view like a stage being revealed behind curtains. It was time. He was done being the ghost. Now he was the reckoning. Silas stepped into the Greenwich estate as quietly as a shadow. Mrs. Winters, the longtime housekeeper, met him at the door, surprised but not alarmed. She recognized him. Of course she did. Everyone in this world still saw the mask: Silas Mercer, husband, father, loyal son-in-law. "Mr. Mercer," she said, hesitating at the threshold. "I didn't know you were coming." "I need to speak with Veronica," he said calmly, "privately." The housekeeper nodded uncertainly. "She's upstairs." He stepped past her before she could ask anything more. His steps made no sound against the polished wood floors. He passed the dining room, the familiar kitchen where he'd cooked Sunday breakfasts for a family that never truly existed, and started up the staircase. Veronica was sitting on the edge of her bed when he walked in. She wasn't crying. That would have taken more vulnerability than she had left. Instead, she stared straight ahead at the wall, unmoving, hands clenched together in her lap. When she saw him in the doorway, something flickered in her expression, not surprise, not fear. Recognition. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said quietly. "I thought it was time we had a conversation without masks," Silas replied. Veronica didn't stand. "Is this the part where you tell me how righteous you are, how you exposed us, how we underestimated you?" "No," he said. "You already know that." He walked over to the window and looked out. The lawn below was immaculate, just like always. That was the thing about these people, they kept everything polished on the surface. It was what hid beneath that rotted. "I didn't come to gloat," he said after a moment. "I came to close the chapter and make sure you understand what comes next." "You've already destroyed everything," Veronica said bitterly. "What else is there?" "The reckoning," he said simply. She stood now, slow and unsteady. Her voice cracked. "The children had nothing to do with this. Whatever lies you believe about Parker or Faye." "They were involved," he interrupted. "Not blindly, not accidentally. They knew what they were doing. Parker sent Dominic my daily schedule. Faye lied to me about your meetings for over a year. They weren't just witnesses. They were participants. They were trying to protect me, she said. No, he said, meeting her eyes. They were learning from you. She flinched. Silas took something from his pocket and placed it on the dresser, a small silver flash drive. What is that, she asked. Everything, he replied. Every document. Every wire transfer. Every meeting. The real story. I've sent copies to the authorities, the media, the regulatory bodies. But this one's for you. So you know the truth about what your life was. You think I'll watch that, she hissed. You will. Because deep down, part of you still wants to believe you're the victim. That this was just something that happened to you. Veronica picked up the drive, turned it in her fingers like it might burn her. Then she laughed a short, joyless sound. You were never anything but a contingency plan, she said. A tool, that's all. You had the credentials, the background, the clean record. You were just useful. And once we had Parker and Faye, she stopped. Silas said nothing. Let the silence stretch until it broke her. She swallowed. But you weren't supposed to be dangerous. No, he said, I wasn't supposed to be awake. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. Who are you? She whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low and measured. I am the man you buried for 17 years. The man who protected your children, built your father's empire, and lived inside a lie because I believed there was something real in it. He leaned in his tone, even colder now. But you taught me better. You taught me that love can be false, loyalty can be bought, and blood isn't family. So now I've become something you can't manipulate, something you can't lie to. Veronica backed away. You're a monster. No, he said. I'm a mirror. He turned to go. As he reached the door, she said, they'll never forgive you. Silas paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what is this? She shouted after him. What do you want, Silas? He looked over his shoulder. Consequences. Then he walked out. Downstairs, Mara was already waiting in the SUV. Bishop sat in the front seat, flipping through updates. She's rattled, Mara said. She's finished, Silas corrected. What about the package? Delivered to her hotel room as requested. She'll open it, and when she does, the final piece will fall into place. Bishop turned. You sure you don't want us to take her into custody or apply pressure? She doesn't need pressure, Silas said. She needs silence, obscurity, isolation, and time to realize this was never about what I could do to her. It was about what I could take away. The SUV pulled away from the estate. The house disappeared behind them, swallowed by trees. Silas didn't look back. Later that night, from a safe house in New Haven, Silas watched the surveillance feed of Veronica in her hotel room. Alone, dressed down, hair unbrushed, no calls, no texts, just her and the flash drive. When she finally plugged it in, she stared at the screen in silence for 15 minutes. Then she sank to the floor and stayed there, curled up, unmoving. Mara watched from across the room. She's broken, no, Silas said. She's finally honest. He turned off the feed. Outside, the storm rolled in. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The reckoning was complete. Now came the dismantling. Silas didn't sleep. He rarely did not since reawakening the man he'd been before marriage, and children reshaped him into something domestic. Now that mask was gone. The edges of who he was, sharp, quiet, methodical, had returned fully. In the safe house outside New Haven, his team operated with clockwork efficiency. Data analysts tracked the fallout. Mara coordinated the next strikes. Bishop monitored security and surveillance feeds across multiple time zones. At 4:00 a.m., Silas stood alone in the command room watching the final stages of Phase 3 unfold. The Radcliffe financial network, once sprawling and complex, was now exposed. One by one, shell corporations were dissolved. Offshore accounts were frozen or seized. Stolen assets were repatriated, some to government entities, some to victims' funds, others redirected toward the Phoenix Foundation's growing mission. Zurich is done, Mara reported. Liechtenstein will be clean within 6 hours. Final transfers are processing now. Silas nodded. And the children. Faye's at Miranda's. Her activity is minimal. She's been withdrawn quiet. Parker is a different story. Silas turned. He attempted contact with one of Theodore's surviving partners. Sent an encrypted message yesterday morning, likely trying to rebuild some version of what they lost. Intercepted, of course, and neutralized. Silas looked down at the table displaying an interactive map. Red nodes pulsed where Radcliffe-affiliated entities still showed signs of life. There were fewer than a dozen. "What's the timeline on collapse?" he asked. Mara tapped the screen. 4 days. Maybe less. "Accelerate it. I want complete disconnection. I want to leave nothing behind." By midday, the media had caught up. Radcliffe Financial was no longer just a scandal. It was a tragedy, a catastrophe. Headlines screamed of lost pensions, international investigations, congressional hearings. News anchors speculated about the identity of the whistleblower. Anonymous sources hinted at a trusted insider, a family member perhaps. Silas let the speculation continue. The more confusion there was about his identity, the safer the mission became. At the same time, the children were being quietly cut off from the last strings of their inherited privilege. Silas had arranged for both of their trust funds to be redirected. Legally, irrevocably. The paperwork was precise, routed through neutral foundations. Funds now flowed into programs supporting victims of financial crimes and rebuilding communities damaged by Radcliffe-backed projects. "Parker attempted a withdrawal this morning," Bishop said that night. "ATM declined. Card locked. And he caused a scene, blamed the bank, threatened a lawsuit." Silas barely reacted. "Monitor him. Let him vent. What about Faye? She's different. I want her left alone. Let her grieve. Let her think." Bishop raised an eyebrow. "You still believe there's something redeemable in her? She was young. She lied because she was taught to. She didn't build the system. She just lived in it. And Parker?" Silas's voice dropped. He knew better. 2 nights later, the next phase began. Parker was staying at a friend's family home in upstate New York. The family Blakes was wealthy but not entangled with Radcliffe affairs. Still, Silas had been tracking the property. At 2:12 a.m., an extraction team entered the premises. No damage, no violence. Parker was secured in less than 90 seconds. When he woke, he was in a sleek, unfamiliar room. Smooth concrete walls, soft lighting, a single chair bolted to the floor. Silas entered a few minutes later, dressed in dark gray expression unreadable. Parker stared at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You can't just kidnap me?" "No," Silas said calmly. "That would be illegal. This is an intervention. You destroyed everything. I exposed everything. There's a difference." Parker stood. "You took my life. I gave you one for 17 years, Silas said. And you used it to become your grandfather's puppet, a spy, a liability." Parker swallowed hard. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Silas stepped forward. "I want you to face the truth. Everything you had was built on crime, lies, theft, and you helped protect that. So now you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life chasing a future that no longer exists, or you can build something else. You think this little speech is going to change anything?" "No," Silas said. "But this will." He tapped a screen on the wall. A series of images flashed: financial records, private messages, audio recordings. Parker's own voice bragging to Dominic, sending encrypted files following Veronica's instructions. Parker stared in stunned silence. "That's you," Silas said. "In every frame, in every line of code. That's what betrayal looks like." He let the images play for another full minute, then turned off the screen. "You'll be released tomorrow," Silas said. "With nothing. No money. No reputation, just a passport and a name. What you do with that is up to you." He left without waiting for a reply. Back at the command center, Mara waited. "How did he take it?" Silas shrugged. "Exactly like you'd expect." "Do you think he'll try to come after you?" "No," Silas said. "He's too broken to be dangerous, and too angry to be useful to anyone else." "And Veronica?" Silas paused. "She's unraveling, faster than I predicted." He looked down at the last open terminal surveillance footage from Veronica's hotel. Her movements had slowed. Her calls had stopped. She spent hours sitting motionless, eyes glassy. "Phase 4 is ready," Mara said. "Wait," Silas replied. "One more day." The next night, Veronica opened the package waiting in her hotel room. Inside was a copy of her wedding video doctored. It played the usual ceremony, the vows, the smiles. but over it a voiceover played from her own lips, recordings taken from years of conversations. Comments she made about Silas, about the marriage, about his usefulness. Every sweet moment layered with cold reality. She watched in silence. Then she finally cried. Silas watched from the command room, face still, gaze locked. The collapse was no longer external. It was internal now, personal, quiet, and permanent. Silas stood by the window of the safe house, staring into the woods beyond the perimeter fence. He wasn't thinking about strategy or targets or surveillance. He was thinking about silence, the kind that came after a long battle, the kind that made you wonder if winning had cost too much. Behind him, the quiet hum of the operations room went on. Screens blinked with feeds from Zurich, New York, Connecticut, and 3 other cities where loose threads still frayed at the edge of his reach. His team worked like a machine, precise, relentless. Mara stepped in without knocking. "Zurich confirms final transfer," she said. "All Radcliffe-adjacent accounts are either neutralized or folded into the foundation structure." Silas nodded but said nothing. "Media coverage is shifting," she continued. "Theodore's legacy is now synonymous with fraud. There's talk of rebranding Radcliffe Financial under new leadership, government-appointed trustees." Still, he didn't speak. "And Veronica hasn't left her hotel suite in 36 hours. That got a flicker of a reaction. "I want eyes on her at all times," Silas said. "We already have them," Mara replied. "She's not going anywhere. She's not talking to anyone. No plans, no meetings, just decay." He turned from the window. "And Lydia. She's activated, just like we thought. Moving assets, reaching out to former contacts. She thinks she's being clever, but we're 5 steps ahead." Silas moved to the center table, pulled up the secure map. "And Faye." Mara hesitated. "Still with Miranda. No contact with Veronica. She's shut down most social media. Grades are strong, quiet, focused. She deserves that," Silas said. "You're letting her go." He nodded. "She's not a threat. She never was." "What about Parker?" Silas didn't answer for a long moment then. "He'll make his own choices. That's all I can give him now." Mara leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "So what's left?" He looked down at the screen. The final phase of the operation was already underway, but there were lingering variables. The kind that didn't show up in spreadsheets or audio feeds. "You ever think," he said slowly, "about what we do after this?" Mara gave a dry smile. "After this?" He nodded. "When the Radcliffe legacy is just paperwork in an archive, when no one remembers what started this. I think," she said carefully, "that this has always been more than revenge, even if that's how it began." Silas stared at the floor. "There's nothing after this. Not for me." "That's not true," she said. "There's the work." He almost smiled. That evening, a flash alert came through. Veronica had left her hotel. Not running, not disguised, just walking down a street in Manhattan, head uncovered, shoulders squared like someone who wanted the world to see she wasn't hiding. "She's going to her sister's," Bishop said. "We've got eyes on the block. Miranda isn't home. Faye's at school. She's walking into an empty house." "Let her," Silas said. "And if she tries to take anything, documents, footage, a burner device." "There's nothing left to take," he said. Still, he watched the footage as Veronica entered the townhouse. Watched as she sat at the kitchen table and poured herself a glass of wine. Watched as she opened a drawer and stared at a framed photo of their wedding, her thumb brushing over his face. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, alone. It wasn't vengeance. Not really. Not anymore. It was just truth, stripped bare. By the next morning, the last 2 Radcliffe shell companies had been dissolved. Veronica's remaining assets, real estate vehicles, jewelry, were frozen. Dominic Walsh had fired his legal team and issued a statement claiming he had been used by the Radcliffe family and was cooperating fully with prosecutors. Theodore was in solitary confinement. Parker was working construction. Faye was applying to pre-med programs. Veronica was living off the grace of her sister. And Lydia Chambers, the final operative left standing, had just booked a flight to Geneva. "She thinks she's activating a failsafe," Mara said. "There's a vault there, files, names. A final play, maybe." "Then let her try," Silas replied. "And when she does, we'll be waiting." He rubbed his thumb across the scar on his palm, the one he got during his final government operation years ago when he thought he was done with this kind of life. But this wasn't covert warfare anymore. This was personal. This was permanent. Later that night, Silas walked the perimeter alone. No comms, no escort, just silence. The air was cold, the trees tall and still. He stopped by the edge of the woods and let the quiet press in. He'd imagined this point for months, the moment when the machine he'd built, the storm he'd unleashed, had finally run out of enemies. But the moment didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. And something else, something almost like peace. Not because they were punished, not because they suffered, but because they finally couldn't lie anymore. He closed his eyes. Not to mourn, not to reflect, but to let go, for the first time. The next morning, Lydia arrived in Geneva. As predicted, she accessed the private vault and found it empty. No files, no hard drives, just a note, written in Silas's precise hand. The world you protected no longer exists, but you're welcome to join the one I'm building, or be erased with the rest. Silas read the confirmation later that day. Lydia had vanished. No trace, no message, just silence. He closed the file and moved on. 6 weeks had passed since Geneva. 6 weeks since Lydia disappeared, and still no trace. Silas knew what that meant. She had accepted his offer, maybe not out of loyalty or remorse, but out of survival. He didn't care why, only that she was no longer a threat, and more importantly, that her knowledge could now serve his cause. The Foundation was no longer a concept. It was real, operational, global. In a converted high-rise in Zurich, behind the front of a boutique security consultancy, Silas walked through the Foundation's command center. The walls were lined with screens streaming satellite feeds, encrypted comms, and data maps. Teams in Lisbon, Johannesburg, and Bangkok reported in hourly. In the last month, they had quietly dismantled a counterfeit drug ring in Croatia, sabotaged a predatory lending network in Kenya, and traced offshore human trafficking accounts in the Philippines. Each operation carefully planned, executed without a trace. No press releases, no public credit, only results. Mara met him at the operations table. Montevideo is ready. Silas nodded. Target profile: Eduardo Ferreira. Runs a shell corporation that claims to provide microloans to rural families. Actual function debt slavery. Interest rates exceed 700% per year. Once a family falls behind, they're pressed into labor fishing, brickmaking, even smuggling. Network reach: 6 countries. 17 shell companies. 6 judges on his payroll. And the victims? 2,000 minimum, likely more. Silas didn't hesitate. Full-spectrum action, break every link, expose everything. Yes, sir. He looked at her. No mercy, Mara. Not for people like him. You won't get any from me, she said, and went to give the order. 2 days later, Ferreira's empire was in flames. His files were leaked anonymously to prosecutors in 3 countries. The NGOs he funneled bribes through were revealed in carefully timed media drops. Every account he owned was drained legally via undisclosed court orders filed months earlier by Foundation operatives using fake identities. His private plane was grounded by tax officials. His wife filed for divorce. By the end of the week, Ferreira was living in a motel outside Buenos Aires, wearing borrowed clothes and begging for protection. Silas watched from Zurich as the operation concluded. He felt steady, not triumphant, not numb. Just locked in. One enemy down, thousands still out there. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't chasing revenge. He was building something. He was changing the battlefield. Later that week, a different kind of alert came through a name Silas hadn't expected to see again: Parker. Now 18, he'd just dropped out of his 3rd college, caught fighting in a bar. No charges filed, but the incident made it onto a local news blog in Colorado. A surveillance team still quietly tracking him forwarded the footage. Silas studied the images. Parker looked rough. Thin, pale, wild-eyed. He could see the damage, the unraveling. He could also see what was underneath. The same intelligence, the same spark. A boy without a center, without direction. He needs to find his own footing, Silas said to Mara later. And if he doesn't, then he falls. Silas replied, like everyone else. And Faye, she's different. She's fighting for something. She's not like her mother. You're sure? I'm sure, he said. Mara didn't press him. She knew he meant it. Faye had been a part of the lie, but she hadn't chosen it. Silas had quietly arranged for her tuition to be covered anonymously. She thought it came from a forgotten trust managed by a distant relative. She never questioned it. She just used it. Her grades were perfect. She was applying to med school, interested in psychiatric care for veterans. She's trying to undo what they did, Silas said once almost to himself, and for that he would protect her. From a distance, always. By early spring, the Foundation had 3 major operations underway, each larger than anything Silas had attempted before. One in Nigeria, one in Indonesia, one in New York, each targeting an entrenched system of exploitation protected by powerful people, and each requiring more than just tactical action. They needed exposure, truth, carefully timed, precisely aimed. We can't stay in the shadows forever, Mara said during a late-night strategy meeting. No, Silas agreed, but when we step into the light, it'll be on our terms. He pulled up a screen and outline for what he called the reinforcement strategy, a global exposure campaign, using truth as a weapon. Every corrupt politician, every financier who profited off of pain, every trafficker, slumlord, and corporate predator, named, shamed, brought into the light. Silas didn't want fame. He wanted fear. He wanted the people who operated in darkness to start looking over their shoulders, to wonder if someone was watching, to change, not because they were caught, but because they knew it could happen at any moment. Silas called it pressure without blood, a new kind of war. The first test case was a chemical company in India responsible for hundreds of cancer cases in rural villages. Officially, they'd paid settlements. Unofficially, they had buried most of the data-bribed officials and forced survivors to sign gag orders. The Foundation hacked their archives, restored the deleted files, traced the money, then published everything on a site designed to look like it belonged to the company's own PR team. It went viral within hours. Lawsuits reopened, CEOs resigned, shareholders panicked, all without a single arrest. That's what exposure looks like, Silas said to the team. It's not about headlines, it's about collapse. He paused. And it's only the beginning. It started with a routine data sweep. The Foundation's monitoring systems scanned the global financial networks every hour, flagging unusual behavior, dormant accounts, activated offshore transfers, encrypted communications routed through legacy Radcliffe infrastructure. Most of it was noise, but this time one name stood out. Lydia Chambers. Mara brought it to him at 6 a.m. She's moving assets, quietly, through non-standard channels we haven't seen used since the original Radcliffe collapse. Silas Gabriel now looked up from the encrypted terminal. She's the failsafe, he said. You think Theodore left instructions? I know he did. He prepared for his death the way he prepared for everything else. Gabriel stood already reviewing possible locations in his mind. This is posthumous warfare. He knew he wouldn't live to see me fall, so he left the match in someone else's hand. Should we activate Zurich? Mara asked. He shook his head. Not yet. Surveillance only. We follow the pattern. For the next 48 hours, the Foundation tracked Lydia's every move. She contacted 3 former Radcliffe associates, low profile, nearly forgotten. All of them had escaped serious consequences during the collapse. All of them were now back in motion. She met with a private intelligence contractor based in Vienna, ex-FSB, black market information broker. She accessed a data vault in the Cayman Islands that hadn't been touched in 10 years. By the end of day 3, Gabriel had seen enough. She's rebuilding, he told Mara, not the empire, just one part. The part that matters to her, Mara said. The part that targets you. 12 hours later, surveillance confirmed it. Lydia met with a journalist from an investigative agency in Prague, then a second in Paris. Files were exchanged. Photos, names, timelines. Some of it accurate, some of it fabricated. But the message was clear. Lydia wasn't just sitting on Theodore's secrets. She was using them. Mara paced in front of the operations table. She's activating the contingency, a posthumous smear campaign. Frame you, expose the Foundation. Worse than that, Gabriel said. She's trying to burn the whole thing down on her way out. He pulled up a map of their active operations. If this becomes public too fast, it endangers the networks in South America, West Africa, and the Middle East. Victims could vanish. Collaborators could be killed. Mara's voice was hard. Then we take her off the board. Gabriel nodded slowly. Prepare for containment. I want her alive but silent. The capture was clean. In a hotel in Nice, Lydia was taken by Foundation operatives posing as hotel staff. No noise, no confrontation, no headlines. She woke up in a private facility in the French Alps. A windowless suite. Comfortable, secure. Gabriel sat across from her, dressed in black, every inch of his presence radiating calm control. She smiled when she saw him. "Always so dramatic," she said. "A kidnapping? You could have just sent a text." "You weren't interested in talking." "No," she admitted. "I was interested in justice. The kind you think only you can deliver. You were working for Theodore. I was working for the truth." Gabriel placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of every message she had sent, every encrypted file she had transferred, every step of the operation. "Your system was elegant," he said. "Redundant nodes, time-delayed releases, pre-arranged drop points. Still wasn't enough, was it?" she said with a shrug. "No." He paused. "You want to know what gave you away?" She said nothing. "You waited. You expected me to act immediately after Theodore's death," he continued. "But you hesitated. That's how I knew you weren't a soldier. You were a survivor. You didn't want to fight unless you thought you could win." Lydia exhaled slowly. "So what now, interrogation disappearance? I'm offering you a choice." He leaned forward. "Work with us. Not out of loyalty, but out of interest. You've seen what the Foundation can do. Use your skills. Be useful, or fade into irrelevance under guard in a secure site for the rest of your life." She studied him carefully. "And if I choose to fight, you won't." He stood. "Because this isn't about revenge anymore, Lydia. It's about infrastructure, about pressure, about justice that works when no one else can deliver it." He turned to leave. "Don't make this personal again. You won't survive it." That night, Gabriel walked alone through the Foundation's Zurich headquarters. He paused in front of the glass case where the original Radcliffe evidence files were stored, digitally preserved, never forgotten. He thought about how far he'd come since that April morning in Connecticut, since Veronica's lies, since Parker's betrayal. He had taken their ruin and turned it into momentum. The Foundation wasn't just built from the wreckage, it thrived because of it. Gabriel tapped his earpiece. "Mara, prepare to expand operations. New region? No, a new scope." By dawn, Lydia had signed the agreement. Cooperation in exchange for freedom under surveillance. Her intelligence would be tested, validated, weaponized. Gabriel read her first memo hours later. A breakdown of Radcliffe-adjacent financial entities still quietly operating under different names. Dozens of them. He smiled for the first time in days. "Let's burn the rest," he said quietly, then turned to the next operation file. The mission continued. The fire hadn't gone out. It had only gotten hotter. Gabriel stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Zurich office as the alert came through one soft tone from the encrypted device in his pocket. Subject Veronica Radcliffe Mercer. Status deceased. Time of death 4:18 a.m. EST. It was expected. Her cancer had advanced rapidly. The medical team had estimated 3 months at best. She hadn't made it 2. Mara entered moments later, tablet in hand. Confirmation just arrived. Veronica passed early this morning. No obituary, no family beside her. Her lawyer filed a basic death certificate and cremation order. Gabriel nodded, unspeaking. They had monitored her till the end, not out of sentiment, but necessity. In her final weeks, Veronica had remained erratic, an unpredictable node in the wreckage of the Radcliffe empire. She left a letter, Mara added. Physical, no electronic traces, delivered to a private mailbox in Geneva last week. Our sensors flagged it when it was retrieved this morning. Recipient, unknown for now, but we'll have it intercepted within the hour. Gabriel turned away from the window, a grim calm in his expression. It's not over. What do you mean, Mara asked. She knew she was dying, and she hated dying more than she hated anything else in her life. If there was any last card to play, she'd have left it behind. 30 minutes later, Mara returned with the intercepted package. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a single note. Written in Veronica's looping cursive, it read, "He's still watching, even after death. You'll know what to do." The drive was scanned and decrypted in the Zurich operations room. It contained one item, a heavily encrypted video file time-stamped 6 months earlier. It was addressed simply, to Lydia from Theodore. Gabriel stood at the center of the operations hub as the screen flickered to life. The video showed Theodore Radcliffe seated in what appeared to be a prison infirmary, pale, drawn, but sharp-eyed as ever. His voice was faint but deliberate. "If you're watching this, I'm dead. And if you're watching this, Silas won. He destroyed what I built, but this is not the end. You know what to do. Use the fail-safes. Use the names. Veronica knows the route to the reserve cache. If she's gone too, then find the girl. She was always smart. Use her. The screen flickered distorted, then cut to black. For several seconds, the room was silent. Find the girl, Mara asked. You think he means Faye? Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the still frame of Theodore's face frozen mid-sentence. It made sense. Veronica was gone. Lydia had been neutralized. Parker had detached himself from the legacy. That left only one viable heir, Faye. She was 17 now, brilliant, guarded, removed. And if Theodore had reached her before his death, even subtly, there could be a chain reaction still waiting to be triggered. Gabriel moved to the secure interface and pulled up Faye's file. Her school records were flawless. Top of her class. Applied to early admit medical programs. No criminal activity. No known communications with Radcliffe remnants. But something was off. He scanned her recent email metadata, harmless on the surface. But one message stood out. A brief exchange with a professor of medical ethics at a university in Boston. A woman who had worked under Veronica at one point and who had been quietly linked to Radcliffe-funded research programs. Flag this contact, Gabriel said. Full trace. I want to know what this professor's been sending, receiving, hiding. Mara nodded. What are we looking for? An echo, a whisper. Anything that suggests Theodore embedded one final protocol with Faye as the trigger. By the next morning, they had their answer. The professor in question had received a package 3 weeks ago, one Veronica had prepared in advance. Inside were documents titled, In the Event of My Death, for Faye's Eyes Only. They contained bank access codes, foundation names, and a single statement written in Veronica's hand. Trust no one, especially him, especially the man who raised you. The professor hadn't contacted Faye. Not yet. But she'd scanned the materials and the Foundation's surveillance net had caught the signal. She's been primed, Mara said. She just doesn't know it yet. Gabriel stood silent. He had watched Faye grow up, attended her dance recitals, helped her study for algebra, held her hand during her first panic attack. And now she was a potential threat, a final extension of Theodore's will, not by blood but by manipulation. 2 days later, Faye was extracted from her boarding school during an unannounced fire drill. Disguised Foundation operatives ushered her into an unmarked vehicle. By the time she realized what had happened, she was in a secured facility on neutral territory. She sat across from Gabriel, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. You again, she said. He studied her. Calm, controlled, not frightened, just calculating. You knew this was coming, he said. No, she replied, but I'm not surprised. Gabriel placed the decrypted documents in front of her. You were given access to these, told not to trust me, told to run. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to hear it from you first. Gabriel looked at her, really looked. The girl he'd thought was his daughter, the one who had helped build the illusion of a family, even if unknowingly. Everything you had, he said, the schools, the protection, the security, it was all built on a lie. I know, she said, but I didn't lie. I didn't choose any of it. You still benefited. And now I don't, she countered. So what happens now? You keep me in a cage like you did my mother. I'm not your jailer. Then what are you, Silas? He hesitated. Finally, he said, I'm the man who made sure your family didn't ruin anyone else. Faye leaned forward. And what do you want from me? Nothing, Gabriel replied. Only for you to choose what's next without being used again. She paused. And then slowly she nodded. I'm staying. Not because of you, but because I want to understand how this works, how people like you think, and how to make sure no one else ever ends up like my mother. Gabriel considered that for a long moment. You have 6 months here, he said. After that, you're free to walk away, or stay. And as he left the room, he knew Theodore's final move had failed. The last contingency had been neutralized, not by force but by truth. And that, in the end, was the one thing Theodore could never understand. Truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. Zurich, 9 months after the fall of the Radcliffe Empire. The snow came early that year, thin white sheets drifting past the tall glass windows of the Phoenix Foundation's Covert Operations Center. From his corner office overlooking the lake, Gabriel Shaw, once Silas Mercer, stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, watching the slow churn of the city below. The past was buried. The files had been sealed. The final traces of Theodore Radcliffe's global influence scrubbed from financial networks, political favors, and corporate holdouts. Veronica was dead. Dominic Walsh was a whisper of a cautionary tale in high-security prison. And the children Parker vanished into the anonymity of manual labor in the U.S., and Faye was still here. But she wasn't the same girl he'd raised. She had stayed after the 6 months. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because she wanted to learn, wanted to understand what power did, how it worked, how it failed. She now worked in the Foundation's analytical division overseeing field ethics review. No official title, no public record, but she was sharp, precise, and terrifyingly calm. Every time Gabriel saw her move through the halls, he was reminded of Veronica's raw intellect, but stripped of the vanity, the performative elegance. Faye was real in a way her mother never was. A soft chime at his door. Mara entered. "Director Shaw," she said, dropping the formal address. "I've just received an alert from Interpol. They've launched a new initiative targeting deep shell finance used in sovereign-backed trafficking operations. 3 of the targets match our leads from Operation Bastion." Gabriel nodded. "That's our cue. Prepare the crossover package. We'll let them chase the smoke while we cut the power to the whole machine." Mara walked toward the digital table and flicked open the real-time map. Dozens of glowing nodes bloomed across it, each one a target in motion. Every line, every dot, every connection had a story, a system of control built on secrecy, exploitation, and arrogance. "You ever think about what this all is now?" she asked quietly. "What we've built." He joined her at the table. "It started as revenge," he admitted, "but it's evolved." "A war?" Gabriel shook his head. "A correction." Later that day, Gabriel walked the quiet lower floors of the Foundation's compound. He didn't visit here often anymore. These levels were for recovery and rehabilitation safe houses, where former trafficking victims, whistleblowers, and displaced targets received security, psychological care, and eventual relocation. One room had the lights on. Through the window, he saw a girl 9 or 10 reading a book with her knees drawn to her chest. She looked up and noticed him. Didn't smile, didn't wave. Just nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence. She didn't know who he was, but she knew what the Foundation meant. Outside in the hallway, Bishop met him at the far end. "She was rescued from the Jakarta extraction, smuggled through 4 countries before we found her. Family. None left." Gabriel watched the girl a moment longer, then turned. "Prep her for the Amsterdam rotation. She'll need new documentation, full placement protocols." Bishop nodded. "And Faye, she's ready." That evening, Gabriel returned to his office where a single file had been left on his desk. Mara's handwriting, subject Lydia Chambers, status transferred. Current role, intelligence asset handler, North Africa operations hub, compliance, 96%, risk acceptable. He read the file, closed it, and fed it into the shredder. One more ghost contained. One more piece of the Radcliffe rot fully repurposed. At 2:00 a.m., the Foundation launched a full-spectrum strike on a global trafficking syndicate running through Eastern Europe. 24 simultaneous raids, 6 covert financial seizures, 8 targeted leaks to international agencies. By morning, the operation was public. But the truth behind it, how deep it went, who really coordinated it, remained buried, just the way Gabriel intended. Faye found him in the war room an hour later. He didn't hear her come in, but he knew it was her. "You were right," she said simply. He looked at her, studying the face that once felt like family, and now stood like an equal. "About what?" "About how this doesn't end, how it just changes shape." Gabriel nodded. "That's why we stay ahead of it." Faye walked to the screen, tapped one of the glowing red nodes. "I want this one," she said. "The Belgrade branch. I've been watching them for weeks. Their patterns, their supply chains, their blind spots. It's dangerous." "I'm not asking permission," she replied. He stared at her. "Then consider it assigned." As she left the room, Bishop stepped in. "She's becoming something else." Gabriel didn't turn around. She already is. You trust her now. I don't need to trust her, he replied. I respect her. And that in their world was far more valuable. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, relentless, cleansing. Inside, the Phoenix Foundation continued its unseen war. Not for glory, not even for vengeance anymore, but for balance, for consequence, for correction. And as long as there were systems built to exploit, manipulate, and profit from the powerless, the Phoenix would rise again. Because Gabriel Shaw had learned the ultimate truth. Justice isn't a destination, it's a discipline, and he would never stop practicing it. 1 year and 1 day after the fall of the Radcliffe Empire, Gabriel Shaw walked alone through the cobblestone streets of Vienna. The city was cold. Autumn clung stubbornly to the trees, and a quiet drizzle glossed the pavement. He moved without security, without shadows, no team in his wake, no surveillance watching from rooftops. Today, he didn't want protection. He wanted memory. Not long ago, this city had been one of his many operational hubs used briefly during his time as Silas Mercer for discreet meetings and encrypted exchanges. Now, it held only ghosts. A cafe on Neubogas caught his eye. The same one where 12 years ago he'd first met Veronica outside of business. She'd laughed at something forgettable, her gold bracelet clinking against a porcelain teacup. He remembered the sound more than the words. He didn't enter the cafe, he kept walking. This wasn't about nostalgia. It was about confirmation. Everything that had needed to be dismantled was gone. The Radcliffe name no longer echoed through boardrooms. The shell companies were extinct. The stolen fortunes redistributed. The children were carving their own paths, scarred but free. Veronica was ash. Dominic locked away. Theodore rotted in a concrete box until his heart quit. And yet Gabriel wasn't finished. Not with himself. Not with the mission. Back in Zurich, the Foundation expanded without ceremony. 4 new field teams had launched in South America and West Africa. The Montevideo operation had neutralized 2 entire trafficking corridors. Jakarta's recovery network was being formalized into a government-sanctioned entity, public, but indirectly shaped by the Foundation's covert systems. And still he hadn't slowed down. If anything, he was moving faster. In the Foundation's private hangar later that night, Gabriel met Mara beside a sleek black jet fueled and ready. I thought you were taking a few days, she said. Change of plans. You saw the data packet from Madrid. I did. He nodded. Our new friends are getting bold. A private equity firm suspected of disguising human smuggling routes as shipping lines. The signs were subtle but real. The methods felt familiar, not unlike Radcliffe's early work. Mara handed him a sealed folder. This is from Faye. She wanted you to read it before the Madrid operation. He opened it as the engines warmed behind them. Inside was a handwritten note. Not typed, not encrypted, just pen on thick stock paper. You told me once that you chose not to forgive my mother, that forgiveness was weakness. Maybe, but I've learned that strength isn't just about what we destroy. It's what we choose to preserve. You didn't just end a corrupt empire, you built something better in its place. That's the part I believe in. If you ever wonder what's next, I think that's the answer. Not vengeance, not silence. Legacy, Faye. Gabriel folded the note, slid it into his jacket, and boarded the jet. As the aircraft sliced through the sky, he thought of his old names. Silas Mercer, Operative 01, Phoenix. None of them were truly real. They were tools. Shells used to complete a mission to wear when the work required a mask. But Gabriel Shaw, the man born from betrayal and rebuilt through purpose, was real. And he wasn't finished. The Foundation would continue to strike where the law couldn't. It would unravel operations buried beneath luxury, power, and legitimacy. It would protect those no one else knew were even in danger. But more than anything, it would remind the world that some systems can be broken, rebuilt, and made better. That power can be earned, not just inherited. That justice, real justice, comes at a price, and some people are willing to pay it in full. In Madrid, as dawn broke over the distant skyline, a convoy of black vans moved quietly through the industrial quarter. Inside one of them, Gabriel sat without speaking, earpiece in, data stream on his tablet glowing in the dim light. The target was close. The evidence gathered, the moment calibrated. He glanced once at the folded paper in his coat pocket. Then he gave the order. Execute. Doors opened. Agents moved. Another empire was about to fall, and the phoenix would rise